Hi, this is Angela Breitenbach. You can find me at social media at Ange Breitenbach. I'm your genealogy publishing coach. What's the purpose for our show? Our show is all about helping you to learn how to publish your family stories, your genealogy stories, and do it in a professional way that is fun to read for the regular reader out there. A lot of times, people who are trying to publish their stories don't know how to do it in a way that's one, affordable, and two, commercially um, professionally done. And so they end up getting taken advantage of. And that really bothers me. In fact, that's a pain point for me that sends a dagger through my heart. As soon as I hear somebody say they've written their story and they're so excited to get it published, and it costs them $20,000 or $5,000, it doesn't cost that much to professionally and beautifully publish your book. So whether you're publishing for your ancestral reasons, for your family reasons, whether it's a memoir, or you're doing like me and like my friend Diana Lesire Brandmeyer, she and I publish professionally. We've both published traditionally, and now we're also doing what they call hybrid, which is indie publishing. And indie publishing is just a name for self-publishing, but you can do it in a way that is affordable and professional and beautiful, but that it's commercially consumable. And that's one of the big problems that I see with folks out there is that they don't know how to get a book that is commercially consumable so that retailers, librarians, and readers actually want to read it. And there are some red flags that cause your book to not sell. And I think some of those things that if we can share that on Genealogy Publishing Coach, if we can share how you can sell your work, and we can teach you how not to pay an arm and a leg to do that and still give you beautiful covers and things like that, how you get a beautiful cover for your book and how to get it to professionally sell and meet all of the markers. You're going to hear that on this show. But you're also going to get ideas for how to improve your craft, how to improve the internal layout. You're going to find out what companies are really good to work through for self-publishing or for traditional publishing. This show is not just about indie publishing. It's about how to publish, whether it's indie or traditional or some form of a hybrid. So my name is Angela Breitenbach. I am a traditionally and a self-published author. I do teach the publishing and the craft of writing, and I'm a professional genealogist. So I'm hoping that my skills brought together with guests like Miss Brandmeyer can help you to be able to publish a book that you're proud of, and not just one book, but maybe the thousands of stories out there that still need to be told. No, let's change that. Millions of stories out there that need to be told, and family stories that need to be preserved, whether it's a memoir, fiction, nonfiction, what have you. We're here to help you get that done. So thank you today, Diana, for being with me so that you can share some of your expertise, but also so that you can ask some of your questions that we were talking about privately that you wanted to know more about, having to do with DNA, having to do with genealogy, and how do you get those things into your stories, or how do you get that information? So Diana Brandmeyer, would you show us one of your gorgeous books, please?
Oh, I would love to, and thank you for having me on. It's exciting always to show up on these things. This is one of my books. Can you see the cover? May I back a little bit more? A Bride's Dilemma.
In Friendship, Tennessee.
Yes, yes. It's part of the Frontier Legacy Bride series. So there's 3 of these in this series, and it was really fun to write.
Now, what did you use out of your own ancestry in this book?
The love of my grandmother's green beans.
I love it.
Yeah.
I truly love that because it doesn't always have to be the exact story. And one of the problems that I hear from writers all the time is they don't know what to include and what not to include. And often they start with I love Steve Martin's the way he starts out one of his movies. I was born a poor black child. And
Yes.
you know he's a white man.
Yes. Yes.
But I think what's really important is you don't need to start with pedantic, I was born, or she was born, or he was born. And
Yeah.
you start with the love of something about that
Yes.
person. So, green beans, tell us more.
The green beans. Well, I guess for me, it became, I can still just see my grandmother sitting on the porch, and I was next to her, and we would snap beans. And she would tell me stories, which sadly I cannot remember, but little pieces have stuck in there about things like, you came from royalty. What? Mom says I'm not a queen. I'm not a princess. So, these little things have made me want to follow my path in the genealogy area. But it also, I think, helped me create stories by listening to her stories. And it was a way to honor her. And I'm not sure she would feel honored about her green beans. But to me, it was just a special thing that I wanted to share that in my book somehow.
I think it's really important to share something that was the normal daily life. And a lot of times people don't realize that though you don't want pedantic, da 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 da,
Yes.
you do want a sense of place and space and belonging and people and what was important to them. And if she's sitting there, was it snapping the green beans?
Yes, snapping the green beans, yes.
Yeah. See, and I think my own grandchildren, we have them over every year to climb our apple trees and help us harvest apples. And
Yeah.
I think that is something that would be really memorable to them, just like the green beans.
Yes.
So it isn't that it's specifically um, XYZ, but it's that that memory is tied to something deep rooted in your family history and in your spirit that you use to create a story. I think it's beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's just something, it's just how I write.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to find those things that probably relate to everyone, not just, as you said, the pedantic stuff. It's for some people, it's crocheting and remembering how they were taught by their grandparents. I was taught that. I wasn't taught well. No, let's rephrase it. I didn't learn well. So, there's just so many things to learn that one just wasn't on top. But she also taught me quilting, things like that. And I try to pull those things in, and it may not be a quilting bee, but it might be a quilt, some special thing being made. And I think if you're coming from yourself, you're going to put more into that story and into that feeling. So
I think that's really important. And I think preserving not just the family history, but the family way of being is really important. And I know I have different things. Quilting was important in my stepmom's life and in that part of my family. And she was a very important person in my life. And so I have quilts all over my house from her that she's made. And she made a quilt for every one of my children when they graduated from high school. And that included, so this was an interesting thing. My stepmom, as a step grandma, even made quilts for her step grandchildren. And I think some of the things that we forget is that the family extends in many different ways, and including step and adoptive, even foster children, because we've fostered a few kids in our family, that kind of a thing, into your way of being shares love and tenderness and a sense of belonging that you are cared about. And I think sitting on the porch, snapping those green beans and telling that story is awesome. So how did you then cultivate that into an actual story?
Oh, hard questions. Hard questions.
Sorry.
That's very hard. Because I don't want to give away what happens with the green beans.
Right.
But it becomes a survival thing in the story. Mm-hmm. And we had hard times growing up, like most people. And sometimes that's all you get is a small thing, and it becomes no longer a joy. But then you look back and you think of another memory that's associated to it, and it is a joy. So I think the green bean thing kind of turns into a very joyous thing by the end of the book. I don't want to give away the ending.
No, don't give away the ending. That would be terrible.
No, don't want to give it the ending. But
well, I think it's important because, like, my grandma, my mormor, she was a Swedish grandma, and oranges were a really big deal because she lived in Minnesota. She was born in 1904 in Minnesota, and her parents had come from Sweden. And to get oranges at Christmas time was near impossible at that time of life and history. And so a train car of oranges would show up, and the town would descend on that, and everybody would get oranges, and that's what you got for Christmas was an orange. And and I think about it now where we walk to the store and we grab an orange, and I give oranges to my children every Christmas, and they're like, why are you giving oranges?
Yes. Because I got one when I was a kid. Yes, same deal.
History, and you've got to understand your history, and they don't get how precious that item can be. And to survival in the middle of winter in Minnesota, when you can't get vitamin C, to get an orange could stop.
It's making my mouth is getting wet.
And green
an orange.
You have a really good meal after this stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you asked me some questions.
I did. This is one of the things with the genealogy, and I'm sure you run into, is that there's family lore that my grandfather's mother was a Native American. But I can't find that anywhere in the records. And I've done the DNA test. My mother refuses to do it. She's 89. And my dad is long gone. So I don't know. It doesn't show up. And my grandmother was very insistent that this was a true story. But I'm not finding that. So I don't know. Was this a second wife? Was it she just was a darker skinned person? It is possible that I'm not really sure. At the time they were living in Cape Girardeau, which is very close to the Trail of Tears, and in that area. So there were a lot of Native American Indians at that time, and Tennessee, Kentucky area is where they kind of came from. So I don't know how the rumor got started, but I'm very intrigued by it.
So speaking historically, people did call the people on the Trail of Tears and the people of the Native Americans, they did call them Indians. And a lot of people don't really even understand that came from way back in the 1500s when the United States or the Americas were originally discovered. And they thought that they had discovered the Indies or India. And so that's where that, kind of comes from, the origin story. And more recently, countries all over the world have gone to trying to call indigenous people of the place Native XYZ. And so for us, that's why we've gone to Native Americans. And in Canada, for instance, they're called First People. And so
that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's different, and it has to do with just understanding how people were discovered or places were discovered. And, I don't think people today are trying to be derogatory in any way, but I think it comes from where did the history of that come from and why the change in etymology and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's important. Now, to the question about was there really Native American DNA, there's a lot of answers to that, and I'm really glad that you kind of went into a couple of them there, that it could be a second wife. And in my own family, my grandfather's parents, his father, so it would be my great grandfather, had a stepmother. His natural mother passed away, and so his stepmother came in, and there was a controversy because they said, well, we're related to this really famous person who wrote all of these hymns and blah, 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 blah. And then when they did some other family members did the genealogy, they're like, no, we're not. It's not in our DNA. It's not in our... Well, as it turned out, we are through the step relation. And so his aunt and uncle really were those people. And he grew up with those people because his mother died when he was very young. So they were, in his mind, an aunt and uncle, even though they were step. And so that's very possible in your family that there could have been a step relationship there.
Okay.
But there is an issue with Native American DNA in that there has not been enough taken. And this is a misnomer. A lot of people think, or a misconception, a lot of people think that once you get your DNA done, that is it, that is the end, that is, it says it, and that is the gospel truth. The thing is with DNA, that they have an original DNA test that, and there's a couple of them now, but there's strains of original DNA that they're testing everybody against, and that one is what they consider their neutral, or their main testing, right? So
it's a baseline.
A baseline. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Caffeine would be good right about now.
Yes.
But that was how it originally started, and they've branched out and done some other testing because there was a controversy about that person never gave their consent, blah blah blah. So now what they've done is there are large groups of people that have tested, and in those large groups of people, they take our DNA and they say, how do you compare to this group of people? So rather than being able to say, you are XYZ, they're taking these groups of people that have done their DNA with some baselines, and then they're saying, well, in this group of people, and now there's many, many more, so I'm just taking numbers off of it to make it easy. Let's say 100 people tested, and out of that, 100 people seem to be of Scottish descent, 50 people seem to be of Scottish descent, 10 people seem to be of Scandinavian, 10 people seem to be of Latin America. And so then when you come in and test and you're number 101, which ones do you match the most with, right? So now if that expands to 1,000 people and those numbers change, then they're going to, and what's happening now, Ancestry and some of these other companies are coming in and they're retesting against those. Yes. And all of a sudden your numbers change, right?
Yes, mine changed.
Right. Yes. Everybody's is changing all the time because they've gotten a significant number of tests in, and they're better able to hone it down and see how do you better test against those. And so, I mean, I've gone from having this infinitesimal amount of some particular thing, and all of a sudden it's a much larger, because the group has widened of what you can test against. And so this is why our DNA is constantly testing. Is constantly changing, and it's the amount of people that continue to put into it gives us the opportunity to test broader. And so you're going to test that you match against maybe more people, or that this group has solidified and now it's starting to come out. The problem with Native American DNA is, well, it's not a problem, but it is a problem because you can't match.
You can't match. Yeah, you can match.
With the testing for Native American DNA is that not enough people have tested. And so, and if they have tested, a lot have been testing through a particular company for paternity reasons, that kind of a thing, but they're not giving it over for matching purposes for the greater population. And so a lot of people think that they do not have Native American DNA because they haven't matched with it, when they very likely could. But the other problem comes in for our understanding of it is that DNA does not make you a tribal member. And no, this is why the Native American peoples don't really like to test with these big companies. More and more are testing, but they don't want to say you're admitted into the tribe, because that's not how they admit you into the tribe. And so there's the controversy of whether or not, if you get 1/8 or 1/4 or whatever, whether or not you have the right to claim certain benefits.
Right.
Treaties and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But you actually have to be a registered tribal member. And so there's a lot of problems that come in there for the person who all they want to know is, this is a family story, it's myth or it's real, I don't know. But they've had a lot of people then trying to use it for financial or tribal gain.
There's always someone.
There's always someone, there's always something. And so there's been a lot of pushback on, and that's why it's not being necessarily used for, the bigger picture. That's
Yes.
one of the reasons,
It doesn't really matter. I just thought it would be really fun to know if this was really
I know,
true.
right?
You know,
Well,
it's
there's
just
more
fun.
reasons though. And
Oh,
some of the other reasons are that the person who may have existed in your ancestry, their tribe may have died out. And
oh,
there's, because there are people groups that no longer exist as they
yeah,
were then. And so, and they may have, that person may have been a half or a quarter or an eighth, right?
right.
And if they were toward the end of that lineage of that particular tribe, then they may not have been able to pass on enough DNA for it to be recognizable for you now.
Interesting.
That's another thing. And then when you get back about right at about 5, 6, 7 generations, normally around 6 generations, you start not to be able to track some of the DNA because that DNA lineage starts to drop off. And so
Okay.
it's very hard to get past your 6th generation and beyond with DNA because what happens is that your parents
Yes.
have, you get half from your dad and half from your mom.
Okay.
And then your children get a quarter of those, right? And their children and their children. And so what happens is you start to only then have the couple of generations above you, but not the 10 or the 20
Oh,
generations, right?
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So then this comes into, you had another question, and it had to do with your mom's DNA.
Oh, I'm not sure if it's the same question you're thinking of, but I was trying to figure out, because I've done my DNA, which part belongs to my mom and which part belongs to my father.
And there's a whole mishmash there because you've got this thing called autosomal DNA, which is kind of a big, broad overview of
Okay.
DNA. And that is, you can be related to, that's where you're like, which side is this cousin on, and that kind of a thing. And that gives
Yes.
you the
Yes.
idea of the bigger, broader spectrum of who you are. And I love how living DNA, when you go on living DNA and you do your DNA, all they do is little colored circles
Oh,
for how much of you is this and how much of you is that.
yeah.
And so it's kind of a nice idea of, blue circles mean you're I don't know, Scottish, and pink circles mean, you're Swedish or whatever. Um and so they kind of mix them so you see that all over your body. So
Yeah.
it's kind of all over the
Well,
figure.
that explains why I'm Scottish.
Yeah, there you go.
Blue is my favorite color ever.
I was just being,
I know. Just
there's
kidding.
different color. Green, purple.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah. So long story short, the autosomal gives you a big overview of maybe who
Okay.
you might be. The mtDNA
Yeah,
is
that's the one you mentioned.
yeah, that's your maternal DNA. And that one actually travels down centuries after centuries after centuries with minor variations happening. And there's not an absolute on when, but 10 or 20 generations, you might get a change in that. So
Wow.
you can go from you to your mother to her mother to her mother to her mother to her mother. And you can
Goodness.
go all the way back into the beginning of time. And there's this book that I really enjoyed called The Seven Daughters of Eve. And that
Sorry.
one, that's okay. The
Okay. I am sorry.
Hey, it's Zoom time, COVID time. What can you say? Um, the Seven Daughters of Eve talk about like the 7 original mothers that DNA can recognize. Now,
Okay.
how did those 7 women get here? Obviously, from other,
Yes.
women, probably Eve.
Yes.
So that's why they call it 7 Daughters of Eve. But all of the lineages of mtDNA today can track back, according to this scientist, to one of those 7 women. And so it's really absolutely fascinating.
Okay.
And
But we have to stop now because I'm going to just go start researching. This
the,
is so fascinating.
it is, it's really fun. And that's a really fun book.
It's like a
Um,
puzzle. I want to solve it.
yeah. So when you get that and you get your mtDNA, you can literally track back through the centuries and through the countries to where your original lineage of
Wow.
mother DNA came from. And
Wow.
then also from there, what you can do, like in Ancestry, to help figure it out
Yes.
is they have little colored dots that you can attach to different people. And if you can't, sometimes you can get hold of the person through their messaging system.
Right.
And you can do it on MyHeritage, and you can do it on Find My Past, and quite a few of the systems that you join for DNA. And you can put a colored dot if you know where that person's from. And then you can do a thing called triangulation, where you can go, if this person's related to this person, then they're probably on this side. Now, if you want to get more scientific about it, because there's a thing where families maybe have intermarried through different cousins
Right.
or whatever, and obviously that's happened in just about every family. So you need to kind of check each one,
Yes.
but to just get your general concept of it, look at their tree if it's available, and look at who they're related to that you're related to, and then you can put a colored dot on it for this particular family line that you're researching, and that will help a
Okay.
little bit.
I,
Yeah.
I did I did wonder about that because I was like, how am I keeping track of all this? This is getting to be unwieldy for
Yeah.
me. So
That's
that is
one way to
helpful.
give you a simplistic view, and yeah, it
Yeah.
gets much more complicated than that, but you can kind of do a general triangulation, and then once you start wanting to get a little more detailed, then you can do it deeper to make sure of whether or not you've got I think it's called endogamy, where you've got
Big
families that,
words. Big words.
yeah, I know, where your
Mm.
families crisscross over or something, and like that happened in my family where my dad and my stepmom were. It was funny. She was actually his eighth cousin, four times removed, but on his side, she was his 12th cousin. So it was really interesting, and it gets really complicated. But they're both descended from John Bigelow, the first marriage in Waterton, Connecticut in 1640. And John Bigelow was the ancestor, that came down through time, and it turned out they were both related back to him. So they go to the Bigelow family reunion, I don't know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was. And my dad forbade my stepmom from saying that they were related because
Of course.
I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are separated by so many generations.
Yes.
So many,
Yes.
but there it happened because, cousins at one point, and so
Right.
they were related down different lines. And long story short, we ended up related in different ways. So my stepmom is actually a very, very, very distant cousin.
That is so cool.
And
That
so
is
you
really
can
cool.
hit those things are really, yeah, they're fun. But she's related on more than one line. And so that's where I would need to color dot more than one time. And then when I go in and I look at her family lineage and my family lineage,
Yeah.
we would go back and forth. And so that's where, again, you can get into who's related to who.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yeah.
That's I'm going to go in a different direction because I'm trying to figure out this is personal and yet it's possibly a story idea.
Uh-huh.
I fruit flies apparently. um, I know that I have two half siblings,
Okay.
but I don't know where they are, and I see familiar names on my chart, but they're not listed as half sibling, like first or second cousin. Could that be them?
What it's okay, so
How does that?
no, it's possible.
Okay.
And the reason is that there are some charts, and I'm going to have to link it in the notes of here,
Okay.
that show you the varieties of relationships with the amount of centimorgans you have. So when you're looking at, do you understand centimorgans?
I'm gonna pretend I do. Yes.
Oh, it's okay.
Of
So
course I do. No.
DNA you have X amount of centimorgans in your body.
Okay.
And you inherit half from your mom and half from your dad,
Okay.
usually, but it's not perfect. So, you've got, let's say, 3,400 from your mom, and I don't know who your half siblings are from, your mom or your dad's side.
My dad.
Okay, so let's say 3,400 from your dad's side, right? You might have, you know, 3,379 from your dad's side. There's this kind of this weird, it's not exactly
Okay.
perfect. So then your siblings would have a similar number, but it might not be exact to your number.
Yeah.
And so your half siblings would maybe have about half of that, which can, and that there's a range because you don't inherit the exact same DNA
Right.
as, like, I have three brothers. One of those I have the same mother and father, and two of those I have the same father and different mother. And so my DNA to my little brothers is about half of what my DNA to my natural brother is.
Okay.
So that could actually end up looking like a cousin,
That's what I'm
close cousin. So
yeah.
it's very likely,
Yeah.
and it could look like an aunt or an uncle. And so what you want to do is take the amount of centimorgans that you have and kind of match that up, and then you can rebuild their tree and rebuild your tree and find out where they intersect,
Oh, okay. Okay.
right? And
Yeah.
it's highly likely that they look like um,
Cousins.
a first cousin with more centimorgans than your other first cousins.
I can check that.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes. Because I it just seemed like if they were my first cousins, I would know them.
right.
And I don't. So I'm thinking, this just seems like maybe. But I have some kind of weird story idea flipping around in my head with that stuff. So
Oh, I
kind of
love
would
that.
ask. Yeah.
And a nice thing about writing fiction with genealogy is that you're able to maybe take some of the identities out of the, but yet tell your story. And that's
Yeah.
something that I think a lot of people don't recognize when they want to tell their family story or they want to tell their memoir. They're so caught up in the truth that they don't realize that they can tell the truth through fiction without offending anybody.
You can actually write nonfiction and keep the same names, and people still don't realize who they are. It's
Well,
just
tell me ideas of, you don't have to tell me this story, but if
okay.
you were to write a story using, and this is for people listening, if you were
Okay.
to write a story using the truth, but writing it into fiction, what kinds of things could you change so that it is not dishonoring to those people? And I think that's
Well,
a big question
yes.
for writers out there.
One of the things you can change is make it, if it's the true story is, say, your mother, you make it your father or your aunt. So you turn, or you could even make it a true story, turn it into a neighbor, those sorts of things. That, and of course, change the names, change the hair color, change the size of the body, all of those the way they dress or their mannerisms can change. And just doing those little tweaks is enough to throw people off the track. It's amazing how many people do not notice in fiction that I've been writing about them. And
Same.
it's it's not, and it's just because we study the human nature, and we grab from this person, we throw them into one character, and they may go, oh, I'm kind of like that, but she's not writing about me. And yeah, I might be
I think
somewhat.
that's a great idea. And I think it's a great tip for writers who want to write, but they don't know how to tell their true story from their heart without dishonoring somebody's that's either living. Uh,
Hmm.
Maybe they're afraid of getting sued or something like that. And I think fictionalizing the story allows them the freedom to do that.
And
So
change the setting, different state, different city, made up city, all those things.
one of the things I did for, I wrote a book called Lasso by Marriage, and Bridal Whispers was the story. And it's actually my grandparents' love story.
Uh-huh.
And I wrote that one using so much truth because my grandparents told me their story. Um, and I was old enough to remember. I was ages, all of my life with them, but 10 to about 16, 18, where I was asking the questions because I was becoming a young woman. And I used that in the story, but I changed their names and I moved it by 30 years. And I did that for two reasons. The first was I wanted to retain full rights to my story for when I wanted to write the full length thing later, right? But I also, what I was contracted to write was a 20,000 word novella for Barbara Publishing. And I wanted to write a full length book later about them. But the story for them actually took place in 1928 through 1930. What happened that was very significant in US history in 1929 was that the Black Monday and
Yes.
the complete crash of the economy.
Right.
And so if I had put that into the particular story, it would have hijacked it away from their story. And I would have had to do a lot more detail. So I moved it to 1899, and it allowed me to focus only on their love story. And, her name is Maybelle, and his name is Burchard. Well, I changed their names. And so it gave me that opportunity to keep the rights to tell the full story later, and to add in, things like he lost his store because the people in Fox Hill, Minnesota at that time would get credit at his store. And then when they got money, they would go into Fergus Falls and buy stuff there where they couldn't get credit. And eventually his love for the community and trying to help people, he ended up completely losing his store.
Right.
So, but had I brought that out at that time, so there's things I wanted to focus on. And I think that's part of the thing is, what do you want to focus on in your story? And I think
what is your story about? What is the big nugget of your story, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's really important.
And I think that's how I write. I have this idea, the story, the nugget. Then I pull in the historical facts that will fit with that story.
Yeah. And that was something that you had asked about earlier too, or that we were talking about. I think we were talking about this earlier, that a lot of people don't know how to get the historical facts to enrich their story, or what facts to use. So, I mean, I know what I do, but I want to ask you, what do you do to get the accurate facts?
Newspapers.com is where I get a lot of my information. I start there, and I just hit the internet, and I just keep searching for. They go on and on and on, and that's pretty much it. I don't do as much research in the library as I probably should. I know there are books out there that are really good. I ask questions, people who are older than me. That's getting harder now. I'm starting to be the one who with the memories. So,
I hear you.
Yeah.
Did you know you could go on the National Archives for the U.S., go on the National Archives, and they have some newspapers archived for free, and you can even, if you can find some of the states, in fact, all the states have archives of those newspapers you can do for free as well. Okay. And so that's another way without having to pay a membership. I love newspapers.com, and I suggest a membership. But I think it's really important to know that there's ways to get into those newspapers for free for people who are on a budget, especially since, it's hard to sometimes find that information. I also love, do you like Google Books?
I do. Is my sound being odd?
No, you're fine.
Okay, because it's right going in my ear. Yeah, I do Google Books sometimes, and that's helpful too, finding some things. But again, it is a rabbit trail. That is one thing you need to warn everyone who is writing a book about history. Put in a lot of extra time for those searches.
Those rabbit trails that you get just so
entranced. But you get gold from those things. You just do.
You get a lot of nuggets. The story, it just came out today, actually. This is October 1st, 2021. And it's called Song of the Rockies. And this is
out? This goes with Queen of the Rockies?
Yes. And
can you show me your cover again? Because I was really quick, and I want to get this book. Okay, that's a song.
This is the bookmark for Song of the Rockies.
Okay.
And on the back, I put all of the first four.
Well, there's 4. Okay.
I didn't know there was going to be 6, and now there's 6.
Oh my
And so
goodness.
now I've got to get 2 more covers designed. And
Can
then
you can you quickly tell me what is Queen of, because I have it on my thing, I want to read it, but what is the book about?
this is one of those rabbit trails that I got.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is Queen of the Rockies. This one
Beautiful
came out
cover.
last month, September 1st. And this is as Montana emerges into statehood, one woman must decide if social pressure will prevail when she hides an endangered child, risking her own future happiness. Queen of the Rockies, book 1 of 6, opens this delightful series of Gilded Age historical romances peppered with genealogical tidbits. And basically, in 1889, Montana Territory became the state of Montana. This is the first book in that series. And what I was doing was having a lot of fun researching Montana history because at the time I was Mrs. Montana and I wanted to be able to speak on Montana and things like that. Well, I found out just a treasure trove of genealogical information about the founders of Montana as a state and the founders of the transportation system and the trains and all of that stuff that happened here in Montana and from the 1860s through 1910. And so what I did was I wrote that book, and then that spurred the next book, Song of the Rockies,
Yes.
because while I was researching that book, I found out that the last stop in the orphan train that came out of the East Coast, New York, that kind of thing, was Helena, Montana.
Oh yes.
And I found a couple of sentences in different places, like in the newspaper and in some old Montana books in the Montana room of the Montana Public Library, that said that there was newsies and street children that were orphaned and abandoned on the streets of Helena, and some of them had come from the orphan train. And so that's where that spurred this idea. And so I started researching. And then this one, Song of the Rockies, is about a music teacher who's trying to save those little boys from the street. And the society people want to indenture them, which indenturing a person was sort of on its way out at that time. And in some states had become illegal, but wasn't fully illegal yet. And so they wanted to get these kids off the street because they were just miscreants, they were troublemakers, they were, so they were going to either indenture them or send them off to the military as young as, 5, 6 years old. And their idea was, we'll give them a trade. Well, I mean, it's sort of a solution. And so this character is fictional, same as Callista in the first book. She's a fictional character, but she interacts with the real people and the real history of the time.
Oh, that's
And
exciting.
yeah, and what I'm hoping is that as people read these stories, maybe they'll see one of their ancestors and I might know more about them and I can share that.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Song of the Rockies. One of the things I did, like you were talking about, you can kind of move things around a little. The boys' school in Helena actually opened a few years later. I took a little bit of writer's license, literary license,
Yes.
and moved it back to 1890. It actually opened like 2 years later, I think it was. And it was, and so she's battling for scholarships. And at the time in Helena, Montana, most people don't know this either, it was one of the most modern cities in the world, and it was one of the richest cities in the world, definitely in the United States, because it had the most millionaires per capita due to mining and
Wow.
and transportation. And that's where the Gilded Age came from, was this, all of a sudden all of this stuff is creating so much money. And so there was a lot of nouveau riche there. There was a lot of building. There was a lot of bringing European architecture and things like that. And so some of the most beautiful places to be was what people thought was the Wild West, was actually quite civilized. And there was a lot of gorgeous, it was one of the first cities that had electricity. And that was before the 1893 World's Fair, which comes in a later book in this series.
Wow.
And yeah, and the one thing that I had a lot of fun with in both of these books was the battle between two of the original founders of transportation system in Montana. And it was I think his name was William Clark, and the other one is TC. Oh, his last name is escaping me at the moment. But they each had a trolley system in Helena, and built out of the trains and all the transportation systems that they were doing. These men came poor as poor can be, built up. They saw that there was people making money in the mines, so they owned some of them owned mines, but they decided that the way to make money was to be providing the goods to these miners. And so they started with horse and buggies and wagons and the mail systems and the delivery of goods and services. And really, that's how they became these mining and train moguls, right? And newspaper moguls, all this stuff came out of these guys who are actually providing the goods and services. And William Clark, here's interesting. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is in Clark County. My husband and I went to visit Butte, and we stayed in this beautiful mansion. And it was originally built and owned by William Clark. He founded Las Vegas, Nevada. I did not know that until I stayed at as a bed and breakfast, stayed at his home and learned all the history of it, because he wanted to be able to move his cattle and his goods and services between Montana and California, and he needed a spot in between, and Las Vegas was an oasis. Then he's the one who founded Las Vegas and why it's called Clark County. Blew my mind.
Yeah.
So he's in this series,
Yeah.
And it was so much fun to do that, to bring out the real history, because it's not only about, my genealogy or whatever, the history. It's about preserving those things that are completely forgotten. I'll guarantee you, I can't guarantee it, but probably nobody in Las Vegas realizes they were founded by the guy wanting to just run trains through from
right.
Montana. I grew up not knowing that. So it's really fun. So the Queen of the Rockies is the inception of Montana as a state, and the people realizing mines were running out, that they had to come up with some other way of making money, and they became a tourism, place, right?
Yes, I've been there. It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, that's the origin of tourism. And so I used a little bit of fictional stuff in there, like it wasn't really a first pageant, but it was about tourism. So I just kind of used a little creative license. But all the people in there, and the fact that these two men refused to match up their trolley stops at the same time made people late to work all the time. And I found that little snippet in a newspaper.
That's great.
There was somebody just complaining in the newspaper about why these men can't get together and agree. And everything I found about these two men, they argued about everything. Everything. They were just so competitive. And so they refused to match up their schedules. People always work in Helena, Montana.
And I can see more stories coming from that, from these poor people who couldn't make it to work on time, and what effects would have happened in their families. And
and imagine living in that time, and if your ancestors were in that time, and you're trying to get your cattle to market, or you're trying to get to work on time. It was fabulous.
Yeah. How about getting to your wedding on time?
Yeah, right. Get me to the church on time.
Exactly.
And then, so that's the birth of this story. Thank you for asking.
It's interesting and fascinating.
It's really
I'm going to rewatch this recording so I can steal all of your information and write my book.
Well, one of the things I think is important for writing a book, whether it's traditional or historical, whatever, is meeting the need of the reader. And a lot of writers often, they're just writing, splatting it out on the page, and that's the way you should do your first draft. But your cleanup draft and your polishing has to be about the reader. What are they getting out of it? And that's the number one mistake I see in people writing a book, whether it's about genealogy, whether it's nonfiction, a memoir, or a biography of someone else. That's the number one thing I see wrong, is that they don't understand that they're writing for the reader. For it to sell commercially. I mean, if you want to write it for yourself, write it for yourself. That's great. If you want to write it for your family and have all of the details, that's great. And I think you can write fiction and put even, family charts and photos and things like that in it too, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I think you can do that. But I think it's really important to write the story for what the reader's going to get out of it,
Right.
and not be so locked into just the, facts,
And I'd like to bring up too is that as a historical writer, you really need to read the genre, but also be aware that some historical writers don't do enough research. So if you're going to pull a tidbit like your Clark story,
Mm-hmm.
you want to double check that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know you're fine, but you want to double check that before you put it in your book, because we all do take some licensing. So that's something important to remember when writing it.
Well, and take your citation. So, for instance, I use Scrivener. I'll
Mm-hmm.
write in Word, but then I'll transfer it into Scrivener.
I took
And
backwards.
you do it the other way. Yes,
Yes,
there's different ways of doing it. So
I know. I know.
yeah. But I think it's really important that once you do write your story, as you write your story, that you put your citations and your links to where you found it and the date you found it, because that link might disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually take clippings of that, and in Scrivener in the side, I put the clipping because
Yes.
I want to go back to it sometimes
Yeah.
and remind myself what it was.
Yes.
It's also your proof.
Exactly right. Because if someone says, well, I don't believe that this happened, you can send them the link and all of that stuff. And
And
yes.
there it is. And there are times when that's the case. But if you
Yes.
want to serve your reader, the other thing I thought about was I'll show you. So you saw Queen of the Rockies and Song of the
Mm-hmm.
Rockies. So I do the bookmark, but I also do a
Oh,
book
that's
plate.
beautiful.
And the book
Wow.
plate I can sign, and then you can stick it inside the cover. And I think that is so. For instance, on Queen of the Rockies, this one, you can open up to the page, the title page in here,
Right.
and then I can send this sticker to the reader, and you can put it right inside, and you can sign it. You can write a personal note, whatever you want. But then it's there forever. And the other thing I would give a tip on is to use a Sharpie. I had a friend, Susie Q, who told me
Definitely use a
that
Sharpie.
don't use just a regular ink pen. They fade over time, to use a
Right.
Sharpie. And so I use this, and this is on acid-free paper, sticker paper. And then, so anyway, I just think that's an important thing to be able to do for your reader, is
Yes.
give them, you can't always send them a book, because you're sending books back and forth. It starts to get really
Right.
pricey. But you can send a book plate to sign it for them.
Just a heads up that I had a newsletter subscriber ask me about book plates. She reads ebooks, but she collects the book plates.
How cool.
I know.
So,
She
like,
puts them in those little sliding folding photo albums, and she slides them
yeah.
in.
So it's like an
So
autograph book that
yes,
oh, I love that.
yes,
Oh, okay, everybody listening, you got it. That's fun.
yeah. I mean,
And you can do
I
that for
should.
audiobooks too.
Yes,
That's fun.
yes.
I like that. And this is
So
why we talk.
yes, this is how it's. And I'd like to. One of the things that's really stopped me in my tracks from going for indie publishing was the publishing part.
Mm-hmm.
Until I found draft2digital.com.
Love Draft to Digital.
That made it so much easier, because you don't even have to format it. I format mine now using Atticus, but
Now, are you on PC or Mac?
I'm a PC person.
Okay, and I'm a Mac person, so I format using Vellum.
Right, and Atticus now does Mac and Vellum, and it's new, and it's getting so much better than it was, and I really like it. But if you're not ready for that step, you write it in Word and you import your file into Draft2Digital, and they will even design your chapter headings, give you little, what do they call those little heading things?
Oh, like wingdings or
yeah, wingdings or something, and drop caps, and you can even have them put it in a print book.
Wow.
So if all you want to do is write your family story for your children, your grandchildren, You can do all of that through Draft to Digital.
Very, very inexpensive. The thing you need to pay for, though, would be your book cover, to make sure that you have a professional book cover, and unless you know how to design it, and
right.
quite often people don't.
People don't. Now, going back to if you're doing this only for yourself, there is a program called Canva.com, and they have templates for ebooks and print books, and they have a lot of suggested ways to make that look nice, that you could slide your own photo in for just, I don't think I would want to do that for sale.
Right.
But if you're just trying to get your story out, I don't think a lot of people know about that possibility.
Canva is an excellent option, and BookBrush.
And BookBrush too. But does BookBrush have a free version? Canva has a free version. That's why I went with that.
They do have a free version, but I upgraded to the professional version.
Yes.
Because there was a lot of things I wanted to do beyond.
Right. Me too. But we're talking about the person who's just like, I want to write my family story. That is what I would do. I would go to Draft to Digital. And if you want to sell it, you can sell it through there. They'll put it up on every single retailer.
One caveat on Draft to Digital print. Yes. I did not realize this. Things have changed so much, so quickly. But if you're going to Draft to Digital print, they actually distribute to the same places that Ingram Spark does.
Yes, they do.
Print. And I was thinking I could do both, that there would be something. I didn't realize the crossover was so significant. So Ingram Spark is another way to do ebook or print. You can do large print, which is lovely. But Ingram Spark, if you don't have a special code, and we can tell you how to get special codes. Yeah. If you don't have the special code, it's $49 to do ebook and print. Most professional authors don't do their ebooks through Ingram Spark. They do them through like KDP, which is Amazon, and you can also do print. And now they're dabbling in hardbacks.
Yes.
But I do ebook, print, and large print through Amazon, and then I do print and large print edition on Ingram, but I don't let Ingram go to Amazon, and I don't have that. And we'll get into lots of that as we keep going through this through Genealogy Publishing Coach, but really important that you shared that, and I really appreciate it, because I think it's very important that people know how they can do it for low cost. There's no such thing as no cost in indie publishing, because if you do no cost, you are going to have a really, really bad product.
Yes. Here's another tip for the beginning novice. Well, actually, I do this as well. When you have your manuscript finished in Word, you let it read it back to you, because it's amazing how many times you'll say and it the yeah. And you won't even see that when you print it out and you read it. So that will help you catch. Yeah, it'll help you catch a lot of things, or a very strange sounding sentence. So hopefully you will be able to afford an editor. But again, if you're just doing this for your family, you want it to look the best it can. So let it read to you.
That's a fabulous idea. The other one would to add, if you can't afford an editor and you just are doing this for family, Pro Writing Aid, Grammarly, there's another one out there too that you can, it takes a little bit of learning but not much to do.
Not a lot. It also takes some restraint, because if you do everything that Pro Writing says for fiction, it is not correct.
It is not correct. You have to understand that there's so many words in the English language, or any language that you're writing in, that could be too similar. And so you have to really look at it and keep a thesaurus. And there's a new editing program out, and I'm trying to remember what it's called, but they actually include the Chicago Manual of Style in it.
Nice.
And but I tried to use it, and I found it very difficult to actually access, whereas Pro Writing Aid, it was just
It's easy. Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's some minor being that I think that the cost of them is less than going through some of these companies that are vanity presses that just take and take and take, and then
Right.
then some of them even lie in their contracts and tell you that you're a traditionally published author when you're not, and they keep taking, and they're like, they give you a royalty, but you shouldn't even be, there should be no royalty included. You've already paid them to publish your
Right.
book. They should
Right.
not get any further funds. So those are things that I feel very strongly about, and we'll get into in future episodes of
Yes.
Genealogy
Yes.
Publishing.
This could go on for hours if we went through everything that we both know.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have you back, Diana.
Oh gosh,
And
thank
if
you.
you
I'd
wouldn't
like that.
mind, please tell us where we can find out more about you and about your books.
Okay, the easiest place is my website, and it's dianabrandmeyer.com. That's spelled DianaBrandmeyer.com.
Thank
And Angie taught me how to do that.
you. And social media?
And social media, it's also it's Diana Brandmeyer _author on Instagram. And you can search for me as Diana Lesire Brandmeyer. I've obviously not learned my lesson on how to brand myself correctly. That's another show.
That is another show.
Yes, but you can find me on Facebook as well and on Pinterest. So
Thank you. And you are one of the pencil dancers.
I am. Yeah.
And if you'd like to join the Pencil Dancer group on Facebook, you can put in a request, and it's the Pencil Dancers Review Crew. Did I get that name right?
I think it's Reader and Review.
Reader and Review Crew.
Yeah, something like that.
Good.
If you put in Pencil Dancers, you'll find us.
And then there are a variety of things from just regular posts with 5 different authors, or there are sometimes there are book giveaways or review requests by the authors, and then you can get free books and things like that. So come join us on Pencil Dancers.
Yes.
My name is Angela Breitenbach. I am your genealogy publishing coach. I'm interviewing wonderful authors like Diana Brandmeyer and trying to help you have a simpler, smoother, much less expensive professional journey to writing and publishing, and particularly so that you will preserve your family's genealogy stories. Thank you for being with us today, and we will see you back next time on Genealogy Publishing Coach.